You're listening to Soundside. I'm Gabriel Spitzer, in today for Libby Denkman. Bills have been in the news. In D.C., the president's so-called Big Beautiful Bill is facing a contentious fight in the Senate. Governor Ferguson recently signed over 400 bills into law. But there was other bill-related news in recent weeks, and we went to see someone who's been right in the middle of it.
Yes.
I'm Gabriel. How's it going?
Alejandro, very nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you, too. Thanks so much for making the time to talk to us about hummingbirds.
How are you?
That's Alejandro Rico Guevara, one of the foremost researchers on hummingbird bills. His lab is a small room filled with complicated-looking instruments that measure hummingbird respiration and temperature. But I'm here to learn about a more low-tech tool, red plastic hummingbird feeders, like the kind you'd buy at a hardware store or a Target.
Yeah, so we have feeders here. There are some equipment that we use to study their behaviors in different areas, which is part of what the paper is about.
Alejandro has spent years studying how hummingbirds use their beaks to feed and fight. But his latest research looked at how human actions seem to be driving a high-speed example of evolution in hummingbird bills. Alejandro is an assistant professor of biology at the University of Washington, and he's co-author of a study published last month in Global Change Biology. It shows how hummingbird feeders have influenced the size and shape of hummingbird bills in just a matter of decades. Alejandro, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is super exciting, and I love to share our research.
It's a big day for hummingbirds. So this study is about Anna's hummingbird. Can you kind of introduce us to this bird? What does it look like?
It's an amazing hummingbird that is actually all around us. It's a very urban hummingbird, so you would see it in parks. The males have reddish rose feathers. I say magenta is the color that I describe them, in their throats and their crown. So in the males, they have sort of this helmet all around, and the rest of the body is kind of greenish, grayish in the front. And the females are mostly green and gray with a few feathers in the throat, the same color as the males. But when the sun hits them right, it's just like fabulous. It's gorgeous.
Oh, wow. So why did you choose to study this particular variety of hummingbirds?
So because they are so urban, they are very adapted to being around us. And that allows the possibility to ask questions regarding how that popular pastime, which is feeding them, has influenced their shape, in this case, the bill shape.
All right, so you're looking at the prevalence of these hummingbird feeders and then any effects that it might be having or correlating with in the hummingbirds themselves. And I wanted to ask you about how you count both of those things. So how do you figure out how many feeders are in a given place or what the trends are over time?
So that's one of the most challenging aspects of estimations. But we use as proxies, actually, because we were interested to do it through time. Then we wanted to know how popular they were. So our proxy for hummingbird feeder abundance is actually the mentions in newspapers that we can collect through time, all the way back through the same range of time where we have access to the earliest specimens.
You're talking about like ads for hummingbird feeders.
Exactly. So we search for specific words, and these words were, on one hand, feeders, and on the other hand, eucalyptus, because we were also interested in how the introduction of eucalyptus had affected both the morphology but also the distribution.
Yeah. Why eucalyptus?
Because hummingbirds feed on eucalyptus, and eucalyptus are non-native, so they are native to Australia, where actually another group of nectar-feeding birds, the Australian honeyeaters, feed from them, so they produce quite good nectar for birds. So here, hummingbirds have been drinking from them, and that's a big impact that we thought could be influencing their bill shape as well.
Yeah, so you're looking at these two kind of novel, abundant food sources and how they are affecting the actual species that feeds on them. So these hummingbird feeders, I mean, are they like the ones that we all picture that look just kind of like a bottle of sugar water that you would get at Target or something?
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing about hummingbird feeders is that regardless of the design, they have two main characteristics, all of them. So they have very large pools of nectar, basically like an unlimited flower. And they have very tiny holes in which the bills will have to go through to get to the nectar, and the diameter is mostly fixed because the companies that make them don't want bees to get in them, so they keep that hole very tight.
That's interesting. So that sort of constricts who can feed out of it, and it rewards anything with a very narrow little straw to stick in there.
That's exactly right.
So, okay, then you have to compare that to hummingbird changes over time. How do you go about doing that? How do you do a historical analysis of hummingbirds? I mean, are there records kept somewhere? How do you do that?
So that's the beauty of museum collections. So we go back in time and we take advantage of collectors that thought that having these specimens systematically collected throughout the years could let us know more about the world. In this particular case, we were able to analyze how the bill shape changed from the 1800s all the way to today.
Wow. And so these are the collections that are sort of behind closed doors at lots of different museums, stuck in like a big archival looking, set of drawers and cabinets of a whole bunch of preserved animals, right?
That is exactly right. So at the Berkeley Museum, we have those behind the doors collections, but the work that we do with them is actually you can see the work through glass walls. So that's one of the things that we're trying to promote, making it more open to the public to see what actually happens behind those doors.
All right. So you wanted to understand how these food sources, feeders and eucalyptus trees, might change the actual animal, the morphology of the animal, what it looks like, what it's shaped like over time. Once you got all your data, what did you find?
Okay, so here's what you do. To collect the data, you take photos, and we have two ways to take photos, just 2D shape, one photo from above, one photo from the side, and then you can do the shape analysis, which is basically going around the bill, the counter of the bill, and then you get that. But we also have a new way to analyze the bills in 3D to ground truth the inferences that we were getting from that. What we learned was that the hummingbirds that are more associated to areas where the abundance of feeders is high have more slender bills and elongated.
Longer and slimmer bills.
Yes. So bills get longer, and while they're getting longer, they also get thinner relatively to the whole length. So when you would imagine that you would make a bill grow larger, then if you make it grow large in all dimensions, then it would get thicker, it would get wider. But in this case, what is happening is just that it's getting long, but the thinnest along the bill is maintaining the same.
Okay, so you're seeing this change over the course of hummingbird generations. What is it adapting to exactly?
So what we infer is that these changes are favoring a higher extraction of nectar per unit time. So it's like sucking water through a larger straw. That being said, hummingbirds don't use suction to drink nectar. That's what we have actually studied for many, many years. So we had very clear expectations about how the bills would change in which dimensions, because we have figured out each part of the mechanism of the drinking, which we know how the tongues collect the nectar, we know how the nectar is transferred through the long bills, and all of that set the expectations that we ended up finding. So there is a little constriction in the middle of the bill, and that makes the near the tip has some of thickening because they squeeze the nectar and then they move it through. So it's a complicated process, but the expectations were met when we analyzed the shape.
And then they use their bills for other stuff too, right? It's not only for feeding. What did you find around some of the other functions that their bills have, and how those might have changed in response to the feeders?
Yeah, so one that was sort of like perfectly in opposition to lengthening the bill in association with feeders was the fact that in colder regions, now they have shorter, stubbier bills. And that's because we also show in this paper that they can thermoregulate using their bills. In previous studies, they show that they use their feet to exchange heat. So when they're very hot, they keep the feet out. When they're cold, they put them back in. But here we show that when they're not hovering, when they're perched, they can use the bill to exchange heat. So a smaller bill would be keeping the heat more, closely to your body, and therefore you wouldn't lose that much heat. So it's convenient.
Got it. And then there's at least one other kind of main job that the bills have, right, related to competing for resources and so on. What did you find in regards to that?
So another characteristic that feeders have is that they are unlimited flowers, and that means that it's a very good resource for them to defend. So what we found is that the only males that are associated to feeders, they have sharper bill tips and more triangular bills overall, which would be better for transmit the force when they're poking each other.
And what are those? What does that look like? Just out of curiosity.
So when we also do work with high-speed videos, and we see them basically flying against the other and jamming their bills, whatever they can. Sometimes they bite, sometimes they just, joust against each other.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. They're like lances.
Exactly, yes.
Wow. And so these hummingbird feeders seem to have increased the competition, which has led to sharper beaks.
Correct. So the inference that we would like to test now is that they are fighting more around these feeders, and then the males that have more sword-like bills, they are more successful around them.
Yeah. So just to zoom out for a second, over how long of a period have these changes been measured?
So we measured in a period of 160 years. So in hummingbird generations, that's quite short. It's only like about 10 to 15 generations. So it's a very rapid change.
10 or 15 generations, and you see these measurable changes. I mean, we're used to thinking about evolution as happening over these long time scales, like thousands of years or millions of years. And here we're talking about evolution that happens over decades. What do we take from that? I mean, is this a special case, or does that suggest that this rapid evolution is happening a lot more often than we're generally aware of?
I think it's the latter. I think evolution happens all the time, and it's just when you start looking into these time series that we sometimes need to collect as a baseline to later understand how things change, and this is exactly what we found.
Is the change universal across Andes hummingbirds? Are there some that still have the older model beaks?
Yeah, so in areas in which there is not that many feeders, we find that this is more like what the old hummingbirds, to call it that way, have. So we were able to disentangle things like urbanization or population abundance from this change. So we separated all these factors, and it turns out that it's not that these hummingbirds live in cities, it's not that these hummingbirds live around more denser areas. It's just the areas that in which feeders were popular, those were the ones which found the change.
So a lot of people have backyard bird feeders just for fun because they like to look at them. Some I've seen now a lot of these smart feeders that'll take high-speed video of your little birdie visitors and so on. Is anything in your research sort of shed light on what people should do or what people are already doing and might not realize?
We see that there is a change in association with the feeders. I don't think we can label that as good or bad. It's just nature adapting to this world that we are offering. I personally prefer to plant a bunch of flowers and then have the hummingbirds still, surviving and thriving, but without like more artificial resources. But, when you think about it, those flowers are also, the ones that make it through the winter are not, natural either. And so it's all a gradient of what you feel comfortable with. And I think, I personally don't think that we can say it's good or bad. It's just a response to this world.
You've been a hummingbird guy for at least 10 years, right? So I wonder, was there anything new or particularly interesting or exciting that you learned about these creatures in this particular experiment?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it is just fascinating that we have learned so much about hummingbirds looking across species. And those patterns, for instance, the change in bill shape, you see different species with these extremes. And now you see those changes within a species, and also with what we call bill weapons. So we have some species that have extreme bill weapons, we have a species without the weapons, and now we're seeing how these could emerge. So the earliest stages of these processes, and we see it literally happening in front of our eyes now that we have the museum specimens to back it up.
Alejandro Rico Guevara is an assistant professor of biology at the University of Washington. Alejo, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. By the way, this show is only possible because listeners support us. If you are able to give right now, check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.